Let's talk to Joe Twyman, co-founder of the public opinion consultancy firm Deltapoll, because there's a couple of polls out today, and there's a big poll coming out tonight from YouGov, I think, on people's voting intentions. And we've got it on the front of the Times here, I should say, where Reform have now pushed the Tories into third place. They're tied with Labour, effectively, who are falling faster than a stone in a pond. Let's find out from Joe how it's all going. Joe, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Nice to talk to you. So Reform continue to march on Labour, continue to march up the polls as the Tories kind of sink further and further into the morass. What do you make of it all?
That's correct. This latest poll really reinforces the long-term trends that we've seen in pretty much all of the polling since the general election. That has seen a fall in Labour's position, an increase, significant increase in Reform's performance, and the Conservatives unable, it seems at least at the moment, to capitalise on Labour's failure and the success going to Reform instead. The key question now is what will happen over the next few weeks and months as we go into the local elections in May, which are, of course, the first real test, if you like, of Keir Starmer's government. Yeah,
what is actually happening in May? Because it's a bit of a confused picture, because I'm told that in Sussex, for example, and maybe some other parts of the country, the elections have been sort of suspended, if you like, because Labour wants to try and get their new form of government, local government, in place in some parts of the country, but not in all parts of the country. This is all down to kind of, you know, I don't know what the word is, but basically making, super kind of regions, if you like, rather than local councils.
Well, local elections are always complicated because it's never the case that the entire country goes to the polls at one time. You have different sections, different areas, and different levels of government that go to the polls, and that's what's happening. That's what's happening this year. And it's always difficult to work out exactly how that relates to the national picture. But nonetheless, it actually involves people going to ballot boxes and putting their cross next to a party and a candidate, and so that's why they're so important.
Yes, but why is it that some elections won't happen and some will? And do we yet know what those areas are?
Not that I'm aware.
Well, that's the problem. I can't find anyone that's aware, and we're only 4 months away from having these elections, and nobody seems to know what's actually happening.
And I'm sure that inevitably there will be some teething problems with the new system as there inevitably are. But more widely, very few people are paying attention to the nuances of local government reform compared to the big issues such as the economy, particularly the cost of living, but also immigration, and that's the underlying data that is driving these polls that we're talking about today. And I think that's where Labour are really starting to feel the pinch. They will be disappointed at their performance in the voting intention, but voting intention does fluctuate depending on news events and things like that. But I think there'll be more widespread concern about the underlying data, not just around issues, but around things like leadership as well, where Keir Starmer has really seen his position relative to Kemi Badenoch, but also just in absolute terms, collapse in the time since he's been in Downing Street. Yeah,
exactly right. And I guess from Reform's point of view, in terms of, you know, intent to vote in a particular direction or another, you know, they say an awful lot of the time that they think the system's unfair. They got more votes than Lib Dems, but they got many fewer seats, only 5 seats compared to Lib Dems' 72, when they actually got more physical votes. I mean, what do they have to do in order to transfer the voting intention, if you like, into seats?
Well, what they need to do in basic terms is establish a more effective ground game, as geeks like me say. In other words, actually have people who are able to go out and knock on doors and get people to turn out to vote and go to the polling stations. Right. This is where the Lib Dems, for instance, have been extremely effective, which is why they were able to mop up so many seats based on a lower, as you say, share of the vote at the general election. And a lot of that begins actually with the local elections. Dems, to go back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
For a long time, the Lib Dems were the party of local government. They had those people out there. And I'm sure that, at least to some degree, Reform will be hoping to replicate that kind of foundation onto which they can build and head into a general election. But ultimately, the electoral system is particularly problematic for parties like Reform, not just Reform, but for other parties as well. We did have a referendum on it, and it was soundly defeated. I think it will be some time before it's considered again. And of course, even for Reform to be successful, they would need to benefit from the electoral system, and what we have found consistently is that those parties that benefit from it then tend to sort of gloss over the importance of reforming it.
Yeah, and I guess what they have to do is identify where they can win, because that's what Lib Dems did very well. When you talk about a ground game, they knew where they could target that would actually work for them, whereas Reform have come second, it would seem, in a lot of the places in the last election. How do they make that different?
Well, the interesting thing about that, of course, is that the Lib Dems have a much more targeted approach, and so they only tailor their appeal to particular areas, whereas Reform, at least up until this point, have been far more conscious of the idea of appealing to, as far as they can, certain groups within the entire country. They don't want to be simply regionally based, and they've talked before about how they don't want to appeal just to one group or the other. They want to appeal to lots of different groups. The downside with that is that you don't have regional hubs, and you can't concentrate on particular areas. Although it is worth pointing out that they are naturally more popular in some areas than others, and so it's about targeting. It's about identifying those areas where you can really perform and putting your resources into those areas. But that is difficult, and still with the electoral system, you can have a situation where you come second in lots of places.
Yeah, right. Good to talk to you, Joe. Thanks very much indeed. Joe Twyman there, co-founder of the public opinion consultancy firm Deltapoll, on the news that basically Reform and Labour are pretty much neck and neck in the polls now. The Tories losing ground, as are indeed Labour. It's 26% Labour, 25% Reform, 22% Conservative. Lib Dems on 14, the Greens on 8, others on 5. So more success really for Nigel Farage.